Sounds fine, yeah.
Okay. I
All
actually
right.
had your microphone, Chris, but lost it in Indonesia.
Okay. How did you lose a microphone in Indonesia?
I guess I packed too much in a hurry, and I just left it there, which is so annoying because, as you know, it costs something like 200 or 300 euro.
Yeah, they're quite expensive. All right, but I think we're live. I think we're ready for the first language book club. And we've got, of course, our featured guest and author, Mr. Benny Lewis, here with us today, calling from no other place than Australia today.
That's right, in Melbourne.
All right, and how's the weather there?
Weather's great. As we say in Ireland, the sun is splitting the stones, and the one of the biggest changes, I guess, coming from the northern hemisphere is that the sun sets at 9 p.m., which is, obviously it's sunny because it's the summer, but it's just the later sunset that kind of got me off guard at first.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if you've been following the weather here in Europe, but it's been absolutely dreadful the last few weeks with snow and blizzards and storms. So we envy you a lot down under there.
Yeah, but I can't make any snowmen. That's the catch.
Well, I see that. All right, well, it is the Language Book Club event, so we're here to talk, of course, about Fluent in 3 Months, the book. And I guess the first question that I would like to ask you about the book is how did you decide to, like, what came to your mind about writing a book? Because obviously not everyone write books, but you have already had your website. How was that step between writing a blog and writing a book?
I was actually very reluctant at first to write a book. A lot of people have suggested it to me. It's the dream of many people to publish a book. And to be honest, it's not something that had interested me because I had written an ebook. And if you have your own blog or your own even Facebook page, you can write an ebook and you can sell it there or give it to people for free there. Self-publishing is extremely easy nowadays. So because of that, I figured traditional publishing is probably too old at this stage, not modern enough. But I met with an agent when I was visiting America, and he actually convinced me of the benefits of traditional publishing when you work with a publisher who gets your book in the bricks and mortar bookstores, which means you get to engage with people that you never would online. Because my blog's big, but even if it was 10 or 1,000 times bigger than it currently is, there are still people I would never reach because there are people who do not read blogs. They go into bookshops and they see something on a shelf and they're like, oh, I'll check that out. So that, for me, is what inspired me to get into writing this book because I want to encourage as many people as possible to learn a language. And this is I can only do so much online, so by getting through to people in person, it has made a world of difference. I have met people face to face. That's another thing with the book is it included a book tour that I kind of went around at various places and answered people's questions. And because the publisher helped me, I got in the UK at least, I got a lot of good media like a BBC. Lots of radio interviews, a Bloomberg appearance, all of these really great things because the traditional media tend to take you more seriously if you're a published author. And I can tell you, I'm the exact same person now that I was a year ago. I'm not a smarter person. I'm not more worthy of a TV interview. But those people on TV tend to think, oh, a published author, we need to talk to him. Whereas a blogger, who wants to talk to a blogger?
So, yeah, so many bloggers.
Yeah, it's kind of going with the flow of how can I possibly reach as many people as possible, and that's why I wrote the book.
Right, and did you change your strategy a bit? Because obviously, when you're blogging online, it's a very niche, technical. How can we make this as a? I mean, I think you basically coined the term language hacking anyway. But did you have to make a lot of considerations to make it more accessible, or did you feel like the concepts were pretty much universal?
No, because the thing is, I had to start presuming that the reader of the book has never heard of me before. Whereas when I write a blog post, I write it in the context that you know what I've said. I don't need to repeat anything. I don't need to introduce anything. And then on top of that, the thing about a blog is I can link out to this, I can link out to that, whereas a book has to be self-contained. So I could contain links for more information within the book, but I try to keep the book itself evergreen and as expansive as I could by getting someone from the very start to the very end. And the thing is, I consider my blog to be a narrative and to be as personal as possible with people, but ultimately it's still not an A to Z guide on how I learn languages. You won't find that. So that's why I wrote the book, to act as the how-to, all of the nitty-gritty details of how I actually do it, whereas the blog is more just, oh, I have this great idea, I'll write just about that, or, oh, I've been in this country, I'll write about that, or I'll make this YouTube video. Whereas a book is a self-contained, everything you need to know if you've never heard of me, or if you want to get into language hacking, or if you just like the idea of seeing what changed from me as an adult who was not good at languages to becoming good at languages, and how I made that transition, and maybe how other people could emulate the same steps I took.
Right. And how did you feel after the book becoming so successful? How did that feel as a blogger going into suddenly a best-selling author?
It was very, very interesting because I noticed that people's reaction to how they looked at me and so on were very. It changed a lot. So, for instance, I remember going into a bookstore in America, and I just I do this regularly. If I go into a bookstore, I ask them, "Oh, do you have a copy of my book?" And I'll sign it because it's nice to have signed copies. And I said, "Yeah, hi, do you have a copy of this book?" And she's like, "Look it up," and she's like, "Yeah, we got 3 copies of whatever that book is." And I was like, "Oh, great, because I'm the author and I'd like to sign them." She was like, "Oh, you're the author of a book? Oh my goodness!" And a lot of people have that reaction, and I find it so fascinating that I wrote something, I put it out there, and people treat you differently. They do give more respect in some situations, but ultimately, I'm just trying to get through to people. That's all it is for me. So I feel a different presence with media and so on, but I'm still the same old Benny.
Ooh, fantastic. Well, I got a question from Kirsten, our co-host, but I don't know if she's here. If not, I'll just read it up for you. She asked, Benny, do you think the world is changing for the media and how they look at us bloggers as opposed to published authors?
I do think it's changing, and this is the thing is for people who are interested in writing. Having gone through the process of publishing a book, I would say that it's important right now. There's this transition period. So, like 5 years ago, a blogger would not be taken seriously. They'd just be thought of as someone with a GeoCities website. So it was not the best way to get through to as many people as possible, and definitely not to have your own stuff published. Whereas now I feel we're in the transition. Within a few years' time, maybe just 2 or 3 years' time, I feel like self-published authors will be as good as published authors. They will be able to get their stuff into traditional bookstores. You'll be able to get on TV, and even if you just have an ebook on Amazon that you uploaded yourself, people will still take that seriously. And I feel that is definitely the future. I published this book now because that future isn't getting here fast enough. I don't want to wait 3 years. I want right now to encourage people. So I went the traditional publishing route. But I feel for bloggers, the scene is changing because a lot of bloggers are looked on in the same way as contributors to online websites like the New York Times and so on. And I have managed to, myself, I can now contribute to things like Huffington Post, and there's I have my own contributing part of that. So it's kind of like the lines between blogger and journalist are getting blurrier and blurrier. And I think very, very soon people don't need to worry about having to go through getting an agent and getting a publisher, because it's extremely complicated. And they're all gatekeepers that you have to follow all these weird rules. That I was very lucky that I managed to get through. But somebody who's just as clever as me, who has just as good or as important a message as me, who may not have, for instance, grown a blog as big as mine is, they should still get the kind of eyeballs on their books. And that's why I was talking to Luca, for instance, who's coming out with his book, and I kept telling him, Luca, come on, self-publish. Just, you don't have to worry about a publisher. Just get it out there. People will love it. This is what I did with my first ebook. I got it out quickly, and I could earn from it, but I still reached a lot of people. But there is a mix and match. There are advantages to traditional publishing. I think bloggers who are very passionate about what they're doing should stick to it, because it gets through to a lot of people.
Right. So stick to the try the new ways. I mean, Kindle is growing every day, and it's outselling traditional books now, isn't it? So, I mean, there's really no reason not to look into it. I'm also working on some books, but it's not easy to write, is it?
No, if you're, I mean, one thing I did, the whole fluent in 3 months. I do things in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So I wrote my book in 3 months, but that wasn't like 3 casual months. This was 3 months where 7 days a week I was writing for 12 hours a day.
Right.
The final draft of my book was twice as big as the one that got published.
Wow.
Because then the editors had to go through and take out bits, reduce bits, improve bits. But in those 3 months, I wrote something like 90,000 words, and you just have to be dedicated to it. And like language learning, you focus, you time it out, you come up with a good plan of action, and that's what I did. And it was my entire focus to write that book.
Fantastic. Well, that's a good tip, actually. I might use that.
Kirsten has a question in the chat on the side.
Did she?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't see the chat. I was just looking at Facebook. Oh, right. She put it on the Facebook page, I think. But there was one question before from Miss Wendler, I assume. Wendler, maybe? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Benny, how can I improve my English accent? For example, the and R sounds. And how do I get one specific accent, for instance, Irish or Nottingham?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, with this, I actually wrote a post about how I wanted to understand a particular dialect of the American accent there. And the way I did this, so this is like I wrote the post from the perspective of perhaps somebody learning English as a second language who wanted to adopt to this accent. In general, when you're learning a language, I would say up until the intermediate stage, you should not worry about these things. You should just try to speak the language, whatever dialect it may be, the standard version. Don't worry about having a good accent. I don't think this is something people should care about as much at the start. I realize there are other language learners who will disagree with me on that point. I feel like having a good accent is something to worry about in the B2, C1, C2 stages in language learning. But if you're at that stage, then one thing that I found very effective is the mimic method promoted by Idausa Ness. And what this involves is you take a particular amount of audio. So for instance, I took a podcast interview done by an American friend of mine, Sean Ogle, who has a Northwestern American accent from Portland. And I took a 10-second segment where he said something, and I took that 10 seconds and I tried really hard to emulate that as closely as I possibly could. And I've done something similar when I tried to emulate a native French accent or a native Brazilian Portuguese accent. So you take 10 seconds and try your best to say it, and then record that and upload it to send to a teacher online, but you upload it through SoundCloud. SoundCloud is like the audio version of YouTube. And the reason is because your teacher can comment on the particular phonemes that you're getting wrong. So Idausa looked at my thing and he said, firstly, Benny, you're being way too nasal. And apparently this is a problem that I have a lot of people have when they try to emulate an accent, is they put it through their nose a lot. That doesn't it's something that people just do for whatever reason. And he said, so firstly, stop doing that, and secondly, he showed me all these tiny little things that I'd never really considered that are different. Like for instance, one thing that is different between an American accent and an Irish accent is how Americans tend to elongate their vowels. So S-O, I would pronounce it so, a very staccato, so. Whereas the Northwestern, at least, American accent, they pronounce it so, so. And if you're speaking, you don't have to do that angry voice I did, but if you're speaking, you just have to say so, you just elongate it, and this is one of many things you can do if you have somebody pointing out these little things to you. So look up Edaus and Ness's stuff on Mimic Method. Otherwise, if you have a teacher, try to really get just 10 seconds. Don't try to mimic an entire speech. Just try to get 10 seconds of audio from a native exactly right, and you learn so many things about how you need to change your accent in those 10 seconds.
Awesome. I just wanted to take a second to go back to why we're here, and that's the Language Book Club, the first event. And we got our first featured author here. And I would say if you have any questions for Benny, if they could be sort of at least somewhat related to the book. I don't think this question was too far away, but if we could sort of focus on the book, maybe some people have some questions about, is the book for me? Will I still get something out of it after I learned 3 languages other ways? So forth and so forth. Because otherwise, I'm sure we would just have hundreds of the usual language learning questions, which are very, very interesting. But when we only have an hour at the most, then I think we should probably focus on the book. So I had a question about the book. Well, I had plenty, but one that I was thinking of is there anything you've thought of after you finished writing the book that you thought were quite important and you sort of regret not putting it in? Or maybe if it was in, then do you sort of regret that the editor took it out? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, the editor did take out a lot, but this wasn't necessarily specific language tips. It was just that I was being a little too verbose in my explanation of something. So they kind of try to condense the same information into less words. But in terms of regrets, you have to remember I wrote the book just like a year or two ago, and this is after having learned languages for 10 years. So I have gone through so many processes of learning, making mistakes, that at this late stage, there are still many things I need to learn, but ultimately I think I'm more tweaking my own approach. So I'm learning about new tools, for instance. I'm finding all sorts of great new apps, new websites, but the problem is I would not be able to write about these tools in the book, because a book, especially a published book, which can only be updated realistically once every 3 or 4 or 5 years, I can't put links in there. I can't say download the app, because for all I know the app could be obsolete, or a better app could come out, So that's why I don't really have any regrets. I think the book stands on its own right now, and when there was something that I knew could be updated, then I did actually just refer to a link. So like I ended every chapter with a little link that people can check out to see, would there be more that I would add to this? Are there more resources that have come out? And that was my way of trying to keep the book as up to date as possible. But I'm actually very happy with how the book is. I think it will stand on its own for at least 10 years. Like, even if so many resources will change, this book, my goal was to make it, as we say, evergreen.
Yeah.
So it lasts. So I'm actually very happy with how it turned out because of that.
Yeah, I can see how that is a limitation of the published book. I didn't even think about that, but I guess that's another point to the digital Kindle books or whatever marketplace you choose, is that you can just upload a new PDF every week if that's what you wanted. But that's interesting. I just wanted to mention as well, if you're interested in Fluent 3 Months, and I guess particularly if you're from the UK today, There's a sale
Or
going on.
Europe. They'll ship it all over Europe as well.
Oh, really? I couldn't buy it the other day, but maybe I pressed a wrong link or something. But
Oh, okay. Well, no, I'll tell you why. It's not. It doesn't depend on which country you're in. It depends on which account you're logged into in your Kindle. So if you're logged into your Danish Amazon account or an Amazon from another country, then that wouldn't necessarily work. But if you log in with a UK login, then it wouldn't really matter. And I think you can do that with various European countries.
fantastic. But that offer and every other offer that we're going to talk about today is on languagebookclub.com. You can click on books at the top. And there's also a button to tweet out the offer, a one-click tweet, if you want to tell your friends about some of these great bargains. But you will have, for this special offer, you will have to use the Amazon.co.uk Kindle Marketplace. And the offer is, why don't you say it, Benny? It sounds better, I think.
It's 80% off the normal price. It's reduced to £1.99.
And what can you get for £1.99 these days? So I would definitely say that's a good use of your money lying around. So if you have any more questions for Benny about the Fluent 3 Months book, or writing, or language learning, feel free to put it in the event page that we're running everything from. The stream is pinned to the top, so you should be able to find it there. But in the meantime, I guess we can go back to what you were saying before about pronunciation, because I find it interesting. The sort of, like you say, there's a very diverse opinion about pronunciation. I recently interviewed Gabriel Weiner, and he's really, really huge on taking a long time of pronunciation before you even learn a word. And I always thought this was sort of, counterintuitive, because if you don't know what you're about to pronounce, or if you don't have any clue about it, how can you sort of build the pronunciation basics? But he is an opera singer, I guess that's what they learn. And I saw some benefits with it. But then I thought about your approach as well, which seems a lot more sort of down-to-earth basic, right? So do you have any comments on those two sort of different...
Yeah, I mean, the thing you have to remember is one thing that I do say in my book and on my blog very consistently is I do have very specific advice that I give people, but this is not, I don't have some kind of a dogma of belief that this is the only way people must learn. So for instance, I'm well known for promoting a speak from day one attitude. I'm definitely one for promoting mistakes. And like you said, with pronunciation, I think it's good if you're understood. So an English speaker from Spain might say, for instance, I want to go to the school. And that's bad pronunciation, but it's understandable. Now, I think that's fine, because at the start, my priority is communication. I want to get the flow in communication, and I really do believe, later on is a better time to tidy up those mistakes. However, other people will argue that fossilization comes into play, and that anything you learn at the start will be burnt into you forever. I really do not believe that. Some people can point to scientific proof where they think fossilization is true. I found counter-scientific proof where fossilization is not true. You can always teach an old dog new tricks as it is. But personally, I'm not a fan of this. I do feel that certain approaches that are not in line with what I do are ideal for certain people. So for instance, one thing that I'm not a fan of in promoting in general language learning, I don't think you should read so much at the start if your goal is to speak well. I think you should focus on the spoken word, getting Skype lessons, and then later on I find you can learn to read a little bit better when you can speak better. Now, the most famous counter view of this would be Steve Kaufman, who runs the Link website. He says, you should read your way to fluency. And he has all Link set up to help you to read and show you through based on Krashen's theory of comprehensible input. And I'm not going to tell people, everything everything Steve Kaufman says is wrong. you can't possibly follow his approach because he loves reading. And reading is one of the benefits that he gets out of language learning, much more than I do as a beginner. I love reading when I'm an advanced learner of the language. I read a lot of French. I read daily newspapers in French. My smartphone is actually in French, so I read all of the settings and stuff. So I'm reading in the language, but I only enjoy that as an advanced learner. I do not enjoy reading as a beginner. So that's why my approach has to change. Steve Kaufman and many, many other people enjoy reading as a beginner. So it's the same with pronunciation. If you happen to come from a background where opera singing and pronunciation is like it's your world, then of course you're going to love to pronounce the language as precisely as possible from the start. And I would never say you're wrong. I would never say you got to follow the Benny Lewis method, you fool. And I'm not going to think that because their method is ideal for their goals. So I would just say if your goals are, if as a priority you want to speak with people, and you may also want to pronounce well, read well, and all these other things, but if your absolute priority is to speak with people, then maybe you should not worry so much about pronunciation, but worry about communication and making mistakes. But if you prefer to read, then a lot of what I say is not as valid, and you should focus on reading. You should focus on pronunciation if that's what your priority is. There is no one best method to learning languages. It depends on your goals.
Right, but do you think that actually, let's come back to that a little bit later because we had some questions coming in. Emma Sibley asks, is Benny going to write more books, perhaps on specific languages?
That's a very good question, and I would say stay tuned. That's all I can say about it right now.
Right, okay, well, I guess we can't get too much more out of you than...
It is a good question, and I'll just say stay tuned.
Right. All right, we got from the Google Plus page, Dustin Godwine asks, Benny, how has social media and new media helped you in your writing career?
Okay, well, social media has been essential for me in writing my book because one thing that I did in both my ebook, The Language Hacking Guide that I wrote way back in 2010, and in writing Fluent in 3 months, I was always thinking to myself, okay, because once you learn a language, even if you were a beginner, when you are at the advanced stage in a language, you kind of forget a few things. You kind of forget what was the hardest part of being a beginner. Mm-hmm. So one thing that I do is, while I was writing Fluent in 3 months, is I just went on Facebook and I said, hey everyone, I was just wondering, what's the hardest part of learning Spanish as a beginner? And they told me all these things, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that was the hardest part. So social media is a different world because if you're, the whole kind of premise of writing a book is that the author of the book knows all of this information and he's imparting it on the reader. And I don't like that. I don't see myself as this super expert who knows everything, who's implanting it into your brain. I feel like I want to interact with people. I want to see what are their problems and how can I answer questions in that way. So that's why writing the book, even though the book is now frozen in its content and it's going to be like that, I still manage to, while writing it, tweet to people. Would you learn reading or do you like speaking? Or I asked all these questions while I was writing the book that helped me develop it. So a lot of as a writer, you need to engage with people. And I like how I blog and how I YouTube and even how I go right back on social media and what I tweet and what I Facebook depends on what people are telling me. If I share a post to somebody else's article about whatever, like for instance, I shared a tool the other day for learning a bunch of different languages, and the type of tool that I shared, I was kind of thinking, oh, do people like this or not? And it went pretty viral within my own Facebook. So that was a good test for me, saying, oh, people like tools. I should try to find more tools and share them with my community because that's what people want. Social media is your way of seeing what are people actually trying to learn? What are their actual problems, and can I help them solve that? Whereas if it was all unidirectional, if it was just me writing on a blog where there were no comments, there was no one Facebooking back me, I wouldn't know. I could guess what people wanted to know. I could guess the help that they were looking for. But ultimately, unless I get feedback, and that's the great thing about being a writer, whether that's a blogger or a published author, the great thing nowadays is you can interact with people and you can ask them why you're writing. You can ask them, what do you want to know?
Fantastic. A great answer. And Catherine, oh, sorry, there was one. L. Foster asks, at the end of 3 months, are you still translating the language in your head?
Am I still transferring?
Translating.
Translating. Oh, it depends, because I've had various different successes in my 3-month projects, but the ones that have gone the best, like let's say for instance my German project, where at the end of the 3 months I was sitting a C2 exam. You know, the thing is, I do have certain things I try to do at the very start. So I would say generally, in even my weaker projects, I try to think and not translate. I try to think in that language. And something I always tell people, for instance, is at the start, if I open the fridge and there's no milk there, do I have my internal voiceover? And if anyone watching has ever seen a TV show, The Wonder Years, it's this old TV show where the little child has a constant voiceover in his head that's telling everything. It's describing everything that happens. And I imagine if that were me, if I had a constant voiceover, instead of opening the fridge and seeing there's no milk and just kind of, you know, shrugging my shoulders, I would actually think to myself, oh damn it, there's no milk. So I try to think that in the language. I'd be like, oh joder, que no me queda más leche, and I try to force myself to think those words. And if I'm learning a language and I don't know the words very well, I might say, oh no, le, ne pas le, and I just try to force myself to think, even if I'm not good at the language, even if I'm thinking in fragmented words that are poorly formed in a grammatical way. And because I do that from the start, I find that when I'm speaking with people, I'm not translating as much as trying. Like when you see me struggling, and you can see this in many videos on YouTube when I'm in this stage of I'm still learning, it's the 2-month point or whatever. If you see me stopping and hesitating and thinking, I'm not translating. I'm trying to rephrase, because I realize in that moment I don't know the word. I don't know how to say some complex word or even a normal level word. So what I'm actually thinking is I'm rephrasing it using other words in that language that I know. So if I forget the word for car, I'll be like, oh, the thing that you drive has 4 wheels.
Right.
And that's my hesitating, is I'm trying to explain it using other words. So this is not a process of translating. It's why if I don't know a word, I find the best way in many situations, especially in the beginner stage where you're learning lots of nouns, is instead of using a bilingual dictionary, a monolingual dictionary is still a bit too advanced because I wouldn't understand the explanations. I use Google Images, because if I look up voiture in French on images.google.fr, I'll see a bunch of pictures of these things with 4 wheels, and I'll be like, oh, that thing, yeah. And I'll try to avoid saying the C word, you know. You want to stop yourself from doing this because that's a bad habit. I try to get out the translation at the start. And in general, I am not translating. In even my weaker languages, I'm just trying to use the few words I have as well as I can. But I would say after 3 months, I'm not translating anymore. And this is not because of something that's happened at the end of the 3 months. It's because of something I try to do from the start.
Right. And I would like to actually echo that whole thing, because for me, that's one of the hardest parts about Russian. It is very different, but it would be a lot easier if I could just stop this relentless translating. And I am improving it, and I can feel a huge sense of improvement when I stop doing the translating my inner English monologue into Russian, because that's almost impossible to start out with, even if you knew all the words. So I mean, that is one of the biggest aha moments I think that I've seen in language learning. It's just because you think in one way doesn't mean that you have to say it exactly word by word in the target language. I mean, simplify. And if you're with a tutor, particularly in the beginning when you struggle speaking, it might be really, really difficult to not ask for help, or to not ask for help. But what you just have to do is just think of saying it in another way that's simpler. That's perfect.
Okay.
So we had another question from Catherine. She asked, "I'd like to ask the question that Chris suggested. Does the book have something in it for both beginners and experienced language learners, or is it geared more towards new learners?" And then there's another question we can do after.
Okay. So when I wrote the book, I actually tried to write it from the perspective of both. So I consider the first half of the book to. Oh, yeah.
Just getting it.
Oh yeah, excellent. I consider the first
This is
half
how it
of the
looks.
book. This is how it looks. Yeah, that's right. I like the UK edition, the white cover. The American edition has a darker cover on it. So for the first half of the book, I focused on absolute beginners, people who do not have any experience in language learning, and I wrote about that, and I've written about that a lot on my blog. But the second half of the book, I'm actually trying to talk about how to get to C2 level, how to get mistaken for a native speaker, which is something people don't discuss a lot in language learning, because the presumption is just you get to C2 and you just try to have perfect pronunciation and that's it. Whereas I think it's a lot more complicated than that. There are cultural aspects involved. There are ways of how you're interacting with the person that are beyond just the words and your grammar and so on. So I try to talk about all of these things that I've learned to get to the stage where you can interact with someone as good as a native speaker would interact. So the second half of my book is for people who are trying to get to the expert level, who are trying to take their okay level in the language and expand on that. So I try to make the book relevant to all levels of language learners.
All right. And the second part of the question was, can you describe your initial transition from your previous career into blogging about languages, motivations, troubles, successes, how it worked, etc.? It's a big question, so I suppose we'll go for the cliff notes.
Yeah, so the transition, I was a freelance translator of engineering documents from French and Spanish, and I was doing that while traveling. So I was already traveling for I think 6 or 7 years before I even started the blog, and I was working as a translator via email, so I was still location independent. And I felt I still had I had some financial problems, and I wanted just a tiny little boost. And so I had already started the blog. I did not intend to make any money from it. I just wanted to start it to encourage language learners, because I met a lot of people in person, and I would say, no, I'm not a genius. This is something that anyone can do. Just try to speak from day one. I tried to tell this to people in person, and I would convince them, and I'd encourage them to learn languages. And I thought to myself, I want to get this to many, many people. So I started the blog. And then about 9 months into the blog, when I was having these financial problems, a lot of people kept asking me at the end of my blog post, it would be about something really specific, like why Czech is easy, or what I'm doing in Brazil today. It would be very specific posts. People would say, Benny, what is your approach? I mean, you've kind of hinted to it. I just want to know, what do you do? So I wrote the ebook to explain in detail, and I released it thinking I might get a little financial boost, but people liked it so much that it ended up sustaining the site. It ended up helping me to afford to become a full-time blogger and to focus on encouraging people, making lots of videos, writing consistent articles, guest posting on other sites, all these great things. And that happened very, very quickly. It happened in the space of just a few weeks that I made that transition. So yeah, I just put it out there and saw what the people think of it.
Fantastic. And they liked it, it seemed.
Yeah.
So we almost have to wrap up here. So I just want to say, thank you for coming. And being part of this first language book club, we're really excited about bringing the joy of language learning and reading books, because reading books is really something that's gone downhill, I feel like, for the newer generations. It seems like we don't have the concentration or capacity to sit down and read a book. And for me, that was also a problem. But I got one of those Kindle readers, and that really, really made a big difference for me. So
It's the
hopefully we
same for
can.
me. I was not a very good reader in general, but I've become much, much better. And the Kindle's great for language learners because I read German, Italian, French, and Spanish on my Kindle, and they let you install the dictionary, so you just hold your finger on a word, and it gives you either the direct translation, or what I actually prefer to do is use the monolingual dictionary, so it'll give me a definition in French of the word, or in Spanish, whatever it is. And it's great. It kind of keeps me in the flow, and I like technology. I even wrote a whole blog post about how I hate dead tree books because they're old technology, and
Yeah.
I love new technology, and it's gotten me into reading, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So I'm very hopeful for the new generations.
Yeah, me too.
And yeah, I would be very happy to stick around longer to answer people's questions directly on Facebook. So keep hitting us with those. And I really appreciate you guys inviting me and giving me the first slot, because it's 10 p.m. now in Australia, so I'm gonna have to miss a lot of the other ones, unfortunately. But yeah, and I'll be seeing everybody at the Polyglot Gathering in Berlin.
Yeah, that'd be very exciting. I saw that Ollie Ollie Richards put a last question in. I guess we still have a minute or two. He put,
Sure.
as someone who has written a lot about language learning, how have you approached writing about what people need and what people want to read about? So I guess he's talking
That's
about
a
the
tough one.
balance.
Yeah. A tough one, because when you are writing a book, as long as the intro is interesting, you can fill the book with what people need, and that's a great thing about what I wrote in my book. But the thing about blogging is, if you come up with something that people need but they don't know that they need it, and it doesn't come across in a presentable way, then it won't be read by a lot of people. And there are a lot of strategies that people need to take, that some go way too far. The BuzzFeed's 17 reasons you won't believe. But the problem with those kind of clickbaits, that plays with the psychology that people are seeing something out there that's desirable to read. So I wouldn't push it as far as that, but I would try to write something people want to read, and give it this powerful title and a nice pretty picture at the start, a nice introduction that kind of tells them, oh, I really want to read this article. And then in the article, I can tell them something fascinating or something encouraging, because for me, that's what people need more than anything in the world, in language learning or in anything, is some encouragement. So I want to make my blog post as encouraging as possible. But people don't want encouragement. It wouldn't work if I wrote a blog post titled, "This post will encourage you. Please
Right.
click and read it." I need to do other things to get their attention, and then when I have their attention, I can be like, okay, guys, it's okay to make mistakes. Come on, don't worry about grammar too much. And I could say all of these things that people need to hear. So that's the thing with writing, is you have to have this balance between working with what people want so that they come and read your stuff, and then sprinkling in lots of what they need.
That's a very philosophical way of saying it. Benny, thank you so much once again, and our time is sadly up, but we got lots more coming during the day, so stay tuned on the Facebook event page, and me and Kirsten will do our best to keep you updated about what's going on the stream, and of course the offers, which is part of the reason we're here.
Excellent. Yes, thank you very much, Benny. It was really fun listening to you, and thanks a lot for staying on so long and being around and answering a few more questions. And I guess we're moving on to the next person in our schedule, which is me. So I better get myself ready.
All right.
All right.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. See you later.
See you later.
All right.